Hi and welcome to WAFA. WAFA is a nonprofit whose mission is to accelerate the success of female founders and funders. My name is Caroline Dolliff, and I'm here with Shannon Grant, who is also part of WAFA's leadership team. After the talk, we will open it up for Q&A, so please enter your questions in the Q&A, and we will in the chat, sorry, and we will call on you and you can ask the question, you unmute yourself and ask the question yourself. I'm thrilled to have Gabi Zijderveld here today with us. She is the CMO of Affectiva, where she leads marketing and also product strategy. Welcome, Gabi, to WAFA, and thank you for being here today with us.
Hello, everyone, and the door repair person just called out my name. I cannot join right now. Is everything okay? I'm actually in a meeting. I'm all set? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll call the office. Thank you. See,
keeping it real today, guys. Keeping it real.
Yeah, so I'm apparently, as you guys figured out, joining from my home. I also told this person I couldn't step away from my computer, but that's okay. It's one of those days where, you know, you have all kinds of home repair things lined up and then they all arrive within the same 2-hour window rather than the same 2 weeks you were expecting. That's quite interesting, but we'll take it as we go. But anyways, very nice to meet you. Yeah, and I was delighted that Caroline invited me to join on one of these conversations. So pleased to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great. So my first question to you is, who is Gabi?
Now this is where I'm supposed to have a really snappy one-liner. So I am a tech executive, but really by education an art historian. So I kind of fell into this space. And for many years, I always thought that I would get around to doing that PhD in Cubist art theories. And you know, it's one of those things where you always think that one day you'll grow up and do the real thing. And then after about 15 years in tech, I realized, hold on, this is the real thing. And I actually quite enjoy it. And I'm good at what I do. And it's interesting and it challenges me every day. Yeah, so I like to say I'm kind of, you know, this art historian turned computer tech executive. But then again, work shouldn't define us, right? I think we probably all agree on that. But I kind of got invited in a professional capacity, so that's my professional background.
Thank you. I mean, I love the fact that you come from, that you have an art background and now you're working in like high tech, like cutting edge technology. How has your art background, or how does your art background help you in today?
Yeah, I think the art background, and certainly in the days when I was doing my university education in the Netherlands, the art history education, it's not necessarily a creative one, right? We didn't do really painting or creation of art. It was more theoretical, but it brought in a lot of different disciplines, of course, history, economics, all these different interplays that enable people to create art. It was so I always thought of it as a very multidisciplinary education, and growing up even in school, I studied a lot of languages. I studied classical Latin and Greek for 6 or 7 years, many hours a week. And I think that's actually what led me into art history. So very broad education. And I think these broad perspectives and being able to look at problems through different lenses, I think that's what helps me in the technology roles I've had. There's of course a lot of people that have studied computer science that end up in tech. And of course, those are extremely valuable roles. The industry wouldn't exist without it. But I think, and especially when you think about the need for more diversity in tech, and I'm sure we'll talk about that some more later, just having people with different cultural backgrounds, educational backgrounds, it's diversity of thought as well that fosters creativity. So I think it really just helps me that way.
I think that's so true. I think the broader your knowledge base is, the like the different perspectives that you can take to solve a problem, and you can pull from different things. So yeah, I totally agree with you. So my next question is, tell us about Affectiva.
Yeah, so Affectiva is a company. Our CEO reminded us that it's today exactly 12 years ago that the company spun out of MIT Media Lab and got incorporated. So it was founded by two female entrepreneurs who were doing research at the Media Lab and started seeing a lot of commercial interest. And at that point, they were strongly urged to no longer keep it in the research realm, but really spin it out as a commercial company. So that happened 12 years ago. And the company is essentially an AI company. We build machine learning based and computer vision based software that analyzes human states, things such as human facial expressions, human reactions, emotions that can get inferred in context, human activities, objects people use. So essentially, that's the type of technology we build on. From a much larger perspective, what drives us in all of that is to really humanize technology, right? We're surrounded by all this tech and these advanced systems that these days we use on a daily basis and that we're, surrounded with. And these have, tremendous cognitive capabilities, really great at providing information and processing data. But it's really missing a deeper understanding of humans and how we respond and interact with these devices, but also even in these Zoom meetings, right? These systems really don't understand and foster this connection between humans and digital contexts. So that would really, set us out many years ago to go on this mission of humanizing technology. So that's basically the technology that we've built, and happy to also talk a bit more about the different use cases and where the technology is deployed.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you. Like that technology needs to start understanding, like when we're frustrated,
Yeah.
and how to respond to us and help us when these, like when you go down a rabbit hole and you can't get out. Alexa doesn't understand me. All these use cases, and also here on the Zoom calls, to understand, like, are people paying attention? How are they responding to my talk? So I think the use cases, like there seems to be so many different use cases. So what are you focusing on today, and where do you think the future will be? And like,
yeah, so you're absolutely right. When you kind of start thinking about this type of technology, I'm sure many of you can just rapidly start thinking of all these different scenarios and use cases, and you named a few really valid ones. But we're a small company. We're just about 100 people, and as a small company, you need to focus, right? And we realized early on that as a startup, you can't tackle everything, and that focus is key. So with a deliberate approach, we focused in on a few markets. One of the first markets where we got started is in the field of media analytics and the market research that takes place within that, especially in the field of testing brand content, such as ads, video ads, TV ads. The big brands, the Fortune Global 500 companies of the world, they spend tremendous amounts of money on advertising on an annual basis. And there's already all kinds of research and insights processes and firms that they use to understand the efficacy of these ads and to optimize ads in the creative process. And our technology in that space adds a layer of insight that is really the true, unbiased, and unfiltered raw reactions that people have to content, the emotional responses they have. So the way that this works, imagine that a big brand, like let's say Unilever, is testing an ad using their research firm. Our technology would be integrated into this whole research methodology, and often there's a survey component to that, where participants mostly paid participants in the study are asked to answer survey questions. And then as part of that process, they reach a point where it says, okay, we would like you to watch some content. And as you watch that, we will record your reactions and expressions as you consume that content. We always ask for opt-in and consent. There's basically a double opt-in that says, do you give us permission to turn on your device camera? Yes. Do you give us permission to record your facial reactions as you watch this ad? Yes. Of course, if people say no, we don't do that, and they can proceed to another part of the study. But if they opt in, then basically our software runs unobtrusively in the background. It can turn on the camera, very much like being in a Zoom meeting right now, and it records people's responses to an ad that they watch frame by frame. Now, because it's done in the cloud, it's done online, you don't have focus groups where you have to bring people into a room. This allows these organizations to do this at scale and do it cost effectively. So now you can have these studies with hundreds of participants in just a matter of hours. Gather a lot of data. You can then use also the survey data you've collected to maybe do some segmentation or correlation of data. And that gives you very valuable information on, how effective is your ad, where, what you were saying earlier about these Zoom meetings as well, where are people paying attention? If there's, things such as, for example, a brand reveal, which is of course the big moment in an ad, are people actually seeing that, or have they already tuned out because the ad is not resonating with people? So there's a lot of really useful data that they could get to make decisions about optimizing the content, and also make decisions about placing the media when they end up paying for it to get aired. And also because we've done this at scale, we have so much data. We actually have analyzed over 10 million consumer responses in, I think it's 98 countries. In the past year. I think we're almost close to 11 million this week. So there's a tremendous amount of data that we have. And with that data, we are able to provide all kinds of benchmarks, right? If you're doing, let's say, a chocolate ad in France, how does that compare to other chocolate ads in other countries, if that, for example, is relevant for a brand? So it gives them the type of insight that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get. So that's the gist of that space, and we've been active there for about 8 or 9 years now, and about 25% of the Fortune Global 500 use our technology for these type of tests. 70% of the world's largest advertisers use our technology, so it's a pretty successful business for us, and that's where we first got started. But then, as we kind of progressed as a company, and as we also packaged our technology in a way that it could be accessible to other people to license it, we started seeing a lot of interest in all kinds of different areas, and we can certainly talk about that a bit more. But again, with the need to focus, it was several years ago that we saw a noteworthy interest coming out of the automotive industry. So all the big car manufacturers were approaching us, asking us if this emotion AI thing that we had created, because that's what we initially called our technology, artificial emotional intelligence, or emotion AI, if this emotion AI could also be deployed in vehicles to understand what's going on with drivers, but also to understand what's happening with other people in the car. And conceptually, the answer was yes. Even in the days that our co-founders were at the Media Lab, they already knew that the automotive industry was interested in this technology, but it was always this futuristic thing, right? That maybe 15, 20 years from now, this will be in cars. Suddenly we saw this accelerate. There were, of course, a lot of changes in the automotive industry in recent years, driven by a number of different things, having to do maybe even with companies like Tesla coming in, disrupting it, innovation in China, regulation around the need for driver monitoring, and realization that if you have cameras in cars, you can better enable that. The use of AI and cameras in the development of autonomous vehicles, but of course those systems were externally focused, right? And then suddenly this realization, okay, what if we use computer vision and cameras in inwards, looking at the inside of the vehicle. So it was almost like this perfect storm of all these things that were happening. And we saw this interest in our technology spike. At that time, we actually did very rigorous market research. In the past, the company had kind of just jumped into markets like, oh, we're going to work in gaming. And then, half a year later, you realize, okay, well, we probably didn't do our homework well enough. This is not the best fit right now. But in this instance, we did a lot of homework, a lot of competitive analysis, a lot of analysis on product market fit, customer need, modeling of what we thought a revenue opportunity might be. Also, at that time, there was a realization that we would have to raise capital again. So can we build an investment thesis around this? And are there potentially strategic investors? Because a lot of these car companies, of course, have strategic investment arms. Are there strategic investors that might be interested? And after quite a bit of rigorous work as an executive team, we decided, okay, this is really an interesting market for us. And we started entering the market, which in the beginning really entailed making sure that we build a product roadmap that was going to deliver on features that were really quite critical for that space. Because if you want to understand what's going on with the driver, you need to understand distraction and drowsiness. And that was something that at that time we had not yet built, and we have since built. So that is now, if you will, our primary focus market. We're still very active in the media analytics space. It has strong, recurring revenue. It's a profitable business unit. It's really good margins for us. So we definitely keep supporting and hopefully also growing that space. But the big revenue opportunity is in automotive. Not yet deployed in cars. So it's a very lengthy process. It takes years to, when you sign a contract to get deployed. But we do expect that in the next several years, our technology will be on the roads. So that's where we are at today.
That's really exciting. So what's your recommendation? Because normally you have the solution, and normally you start with the problem from a product management. You start with the customer pain point, and then you analyze that, you interview them, and then you create a solution. But here you have the solution or part of the solution, and then you have to find a problem where it fits. So what's your and I'm sure a lot of tech companies or tech startups, they might have a solution and they're looking for a problem. Like, what's your advice of making sure you're actually solving a real problem instead of like, oh, I have a hammer and that must be a nail and I'm going to go after that problem?
Yeah, I love that, Caroline. That is such a great question. Not necessarily an easy answer, but I'll just kind of give you my answer that right away comes to mind. I actually would, if you had a choice, I would not build a technology without having clearly identified a market need. And that's, of course, not the situation that our company found itself in. I think our startup was founded in a way that others also to this day get founded, and it's very legit, but it's not a very typical approach, right? Because these were, our founders were basically doing research in an area, and they were basically advancing this research and building technology alongside it. And they were kind of demoing it at these demo days that MIT organizes. It was then when they started getting all this commercial interest out of different areas that they were told, okay, you need to start your own company. So then suddenly you have this solution, but you have not yet found your product market fit. I think hindsight is 2020, right? And who am I? I wasn't there in those days. So it's easy for me to say that, I joined the company 6 years ago, or almost 7 years ago, not 12 years ago. So maybe it's a bit easy for me to say this now, but I think at the time, they definitely did the research around the media analytics space. Those were the first customers they adopted. They identified really, really clear needs. But after that, there were several years where they were trying to expand in markets and just trying to make the solution fit in areas where later on it was realized, well, it doesn't really fit, right? So it is a very challenging problem. But back to your initial question, I think my recommendation would be is, to not really start a startup or start building technology unless you have identified a real need. And yeah, again, it's easy to say, but you need to have technology that solves a problem, right? And is it also a real problem? Is it something that causes so much pain that people are willing to purchase a technology solution to help overcome that problem? And there's still, I think, out there some thinking of, yeah, we can build it because we can, and I think that's super cool. And kind of putting on my creative hat, I think in society there is a real need to continue to foster that and to have that. Like just building cool stuff just because we can build it, right? I think there's a true need for that, but that doesn't necessarily translate into you will therefore also have a viable company that will generate revenue and eventually might be profitable or successful. Then you're just building cool tech because you can. So yeah, anyways, it's a difficult question, and I would definitely, if anyone has some thoughts on that, maybe later on when we get to Q&A, I'd love to hear maybe some perspectives that other folks have on that.
Yeah, it's a really hard problem. I mean, going back to your your roots, like art, a lot of times you paint because you enjoy painting, and then you can paint in order to sell, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And both are in a way legit, but it depends on what your goals are, right? Because if you paint because you enjoy painting and the creative process and you want to make something, that's great, but maybe don't give up your day job because you want to make money with that, right? And so I think in a way that's a good analogy. And there's space, of course, and there's a need in society for both, but it depends, I guess, on what the goals are, right? If you're doing this recreationally because you're painting because it feeds your inner person and it makes you happy and therefore it makes you a nicer person and makes you better at your job, that's awesome. If you're painting because you want to make a lot of money with it but you're crap at painting, then or you haven't found any potential customers for your artwork yet, and that's a different problem.
So I'm going back to the fact that your technology is able to sense our emotions, and now marrying that with ethics, because I know that your company has drawn a really straight line of like what you will do and what you won't do. But I think this ethics and AI is becoming a hotter and hotter topic. I don't know if I should say that, but like something that people are actually paying attention to because of all the scandals that we have. So what are your like thoughts, and what should companies be thinking about when they're creating these technologies and have this personal data?
Yeah, I love that you lined up that question because it's such an important one, not just for our company, but I think for the technology space at large, and especially AI. And there's so many aspects to this. So maybe just starting with our technology and our company. Yeah, so even there's, of course, we get a lot of criticism directed at us, and for the most part, we would agree with a lot of that criticism. Because detecting people's emotions to begin with, it's not that black and white, right? You can't just show a picture of someone smiling and saying that that person is happy. That's nonsense. You don't know the context. Often people in cars, for example, they smile because they're super frustrated with the automated attendant, right? It's like this exasperated thing. So you need to look at emotions in context. For example, in the ad testing space, if you show someone a humorous ad and you want to see if that ad is effective and people are smiling, then yeah, you pretty much know why they're smiling, right? Because you have the context. So I think getting the context is super important. So the more data you can gather will help you to get better understanding of the context. I also think, especially in some of these automotive safety, road safety related use cases, it will always be like a multi-sensory approach, right? It's not just our type of technology that will be the only thing that feeds into a safety system. Maybe to determine driver drowsiness, they might look at braking and lane drift and all this other data that they can collect, right? So I think having context is super important, and we focus on that well. We tune our technology and we deploy our technology in very specific use cases where this context is known and our technology is optimized to the context. But then for our organization, we really split it into two tenets, if you will. It's the ethical development of AI and the ethical deployment of AI. And in terms of the development, I talked about it already earlier. We've all heard about data bias and algorithmic bias, where AI systems don't work particularly well on certain demographics, especially if it's people with darker skin tones, especially if they're women. And that is more often than not the case because those machine learning or those AI systems have been trained with data that was very limited. And if you train those systems on middle-aged white men, then that's what that system learns and that's what it detects really well. It doesn't mean that that system is going to work on maybe a Black woman. And I apologize, 1 second. My daughter left her phone next here and it's going off. So I'll just turn that off. So the ethical development, there needs to be put a lot of focus on. So when you're building an AI system, you really need to think through, who am I building this for? Who is going to be using this? What are the use cases? And then when you collect data that you need to train those machine learning, deep learning systems, and they're data hungry, they need a lot of data to be trained and to be tested. You need to make sure that the data is representative. You need to make sure that, especially in the automotive solution, it's going to have to work with basically any type of person. If you're building a driver monitoring system and you're one of the big car manufacturers in the world, you're not going to be able to say, well, I'm only building this for a middle-aged white man. That's not what your user population is. So, and it's complex because now it's not just age, gender, and ethnicity. And by the way, gender and ethnicity are super loaded because it's very much self-identified, and you know, even the human eye can determine sometimes what kind of ethnicity or gender someone is. So how could you teach an algorithm to do that, right? That's kind of nonsense. But the way we prefer to classify it is just being able to train these algorithms to detect people regardless of their appearance. And appearance can be skin tone. It can also be, is someone wearing a hat? Is someone wearing a hijab? Is someone wearing glasses? Does someone have a beard? All these different ways that people present, the algorithm needs to be able to detect that. So you need to make sure that you gather all these examples in the real world. You also need to make sure that for us, when we measure reactions and things such as emotions and drowsiness and distraction, you need to collect also real world data. You can't just train these algorithms with bringing people in a lab and just telling them, okay, now pretend that you're falling asleep at the wheel. That is a fake situation. That's not a real world scenario. As a matter of fact, we've learned a lot about drowsiness, and there's different levels of drowsiness, and it's a temporal progression of a human state. So you need to collect data that's representative of that. And now you have, I'll give you a funny example. A lot of car manufacturers are now asking us, can you do pet detection? And last week, 2 weeks ago, we had a weekend where we did doggy data collection. We brought a bunch of dogs into cars and we collected data of dogs in cars, because how can you expect an AI algorithm to detect dogs in cars if it's never seen a dog before? So you need to have, in order to be able to think through all these problems, you need to have, what I said earlier, teams that are diverse, right? It's not, if we use the cliche example of the Silicon Valley computer bro, right? Who's probably maybe a white or Asian dude who came out of Stanford, who's in their early 20s. That person is not going to sit there and say, I'm going to build a bad AI algorithm. That person just might have a worldview that is a certain way because that's how they were educated and that's how they grew up. If you now have that person and you build your organization, your entire team as a replication of that person, that's the one view on the world you get. If you have that person who's an awesome machine learning scientist and you supplement them with people that have different, that can introduce diversity of thought, cultural diversity, diversity of education, then you have true diverse teams, right? So in our mind, it's not just what so often is said, diversity of age, gender, and ethnicity, sure, important, but it's also the kind of perspectives and worldview that are so important. And that's, again, why I think having someone with my educational background adds value to an organization. So those are just kind of thoughts around the ethical development, so that one aspect or that one side of the coin. And there's a lot of granularity that sits underneath, right? Because it also has to do with how you manually label and human annotation of the data. And there's all kinds of room for error there, and how you actually do the testing and the performance testing and how you report out on performance testing is really important. I'll just actually give a really small example there, right? Because often we're asked by people, how accurate are your classifiers, which are basically your machine learning algorithms? Well, it depends on what classifier and where it's being deployed, right? Sure, our smile detector, and by the way, for an AI algorithm, detecting smile is pretty easy these days. Maybe our smile detector is 99% accurate. If people read it out like that, you can't claim victory, but because is it 99% accurate for me or also for you there or for you there or for you, right? And is it still accurate when I'm driving a car in a tunnel and the lighting is dark? Does it still work? So I think also the industry needs to get a lot better at how they report out the performance of these algorithms. And then we're not even talking about transparency and clarity, like how the tech industry companies like ours should communicate to the general public and the users of this technology, because it's so opaque. People have no clue how this stuff works because no one can explain it, right? Or at least we as a company feel we have a moral obligation to be pretty transparent and clear in talking about our technology, but certainly not the norm. And then the ethical deployment is a whole different set of considerations. But I think from the moment you found your company, it's not just in AI, I think it's any technology company these days, you need to ask yourself, where do I think it is acceptable for this technology to be used? What are the acceptable uses? And where as an organization do we draw the boundaries because we feel that this is just wrong? And it's really difficult. And an example, and this is actually not something I came up with. I heard someone give this example a number of years ago. I think at a conference I picked this up. Is if you think about the Ford pickup truck and Google Maps, those are tools of terrorists by choice, right? Many terrorist organizations use the Ford pickup truck and Google Maps. Some of their best tools. Those systems were not designed for that use case. They probably, whoever designed the first Ford pickup truck would have never imagined that it would be used for that. So the reality of it is that most technologies can be used for nefarious intent, and you can't protect for all of that, but you can certainly try best you can to anticipate for it and try to control it, and try to maybe through your licensing put limitations on what the acceptable uses of your technology. So that is a really challenging considerations. Our company, when it first got founded, our founders, it's a cool story, I think, but Rana El-Kalyoubi is our CEO now, and Ross Picard was her co-founder, and she's a professor these days at MIT Media Lab still. They literally sat around Ross's kitchen table and said, okay, this is where we think it's okay for us to sell our technology, and here is where it's not okay. And one thing that was declared at the time is that for surveillance, where people cannot opt in and consent, but they're basically being surveyed, they're being watched over, they felt that those were not okay use cases. And to this day, we do not do business in that space. It was a number of years ago. There's a story, maybe some of you have picked it up. It's part of the company narrative, if you will. A number of years ago, actually, it was fairly early days. The company was about to run out of money. They couldn't make payroll. They were just a few weeks out of not being able to make payroll. They were in the middle of a capital raise. And the investment arm of an intelligence agency approached them and said, we will invest $40 million if you guys switch the company to surveillance for intelligence purposes. And they declined the money, knowing they couldn't make payroll a few weeks later because it was in violation of what they had determined was ethical use. Soon thereafter, they did land their first investment round, with the lead investor being actually in the media space. Yeah, so those are the boundaries that they set. And again, it's challenging, right? I think the whole facial recognition debate is super interesting. A company like Clearview lately has been getting a lot of, especially negative press coverage. But the reality of it is there are some really good uses for this technology. And if you look at, for example, the use cases where it involves human abuse, child abuse, and being able to detect basically predators and violators, you know, as a society, we ask ourselves, is there room for this technology, or maybe not because it's out of control and we let this beast loose on society? But how do we gain the benefits from certain technologies while kind of reducing the risk as much as we can, the risk for misuse and abuse? Because we also know that the facial recognition systems, for example, have been used with a lot of the horrible news we're hearing about the Uyghur communities, certain governments that use it to look over their people. And yeah, so it's anyway, interesting.
No, it's a really hard question. And I think every single company will have to figure out, like, where do they draw their lines. So I'm going to ask you the last question before we open it for Q&A. So you're extremely technologically advanced company. And how do you balance, like, how do you actually speak about your technology without like overwhelming the end user or your customers with AI jargons that like sort of like fly over their heads? And how do you actually differentiate yourself with other people, with other companies that might not have as advanced technology? How do you play that fine lines between talking enough about your technology and not, so that you stand out, but at the same time not overwhelming the end user?
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance, but I think it first starts within the organization, right? Especially if you're a technology company and there's a lot of computer scientists, engineers, R&D types walking around. I think it also is an internal education to, in a collaborative manner, folks like myself, and it's more the product marketing types. I think of myself more as a product manager or product marketer than I do pure marketing. Need to kind of help elevate the narrative within the organization to teach everyone around you that you need to be able to articulate the value of your technology in a way that it resonates with the user, right? And I can give you a very simple example. I remember it was maybe a year or so ago. I'll get to that example in a second. And what I mean by that is that I think folks in my type of role, they have to behave like a toddler and constantly ask the questions, why, but why, but why is that, why is that, why is that? And now I'll get to that example. So about a year ago, one of my coworkers, a product manager, who actually was an engineer by training and kind of landed in product management in our organization, came to me and said, it's such awesome news. We finally got our SDK working on ARM architecture and we can release it. And I'm like, that's awesome, because I being part of the company, I knew what that meant and what that could enable. But I said to him, well, that's awesome, but why is that so cool? Well, because we're on the arm. I'm like, why? Who's going to pay money for that? Why? And he's like, well, because now it means we can run our technology on social robots because that's the preferred architecture of social robots. I'm like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. So you're basically saying that now we can start claiming that our technology is optimized to work on robots. Okay, cool. And then I kept asking all these why questions to tease out from him essentially why someone or an organization would be interested in kind of paying money for that, right? So I think it's not easy because often, especially if you're in technology companies, there's a few people in the organization that do it well and many that don't, is you kind of need to put that customer hat on and translate all that geek talk into why it matters. And for us as an organization, luckily, I think we learned it early on, and also luckily, in working there, I have a really strong collaboration with our CEO, with Rana, and she's quite good and has gotten quite good at this, that we build a very, I can't really call it simple because it was a lot of work went into it and it's quite deliberate, but we build a whole talk track around what is this technology? Why was it created? Why does it need to exist? How does it work? In very simple terms. Where is it adding value today? So where is it being used today? And where do we see it going in the future? And why does this matter? Why is there a need for this technology to exist? And we realized that also because we get a lot of press attention, right? We talk to a lot of reporters and you realize that with most of them, you can't like kill them with all that geek talk and machine learning language. There's room for that. There's plenty of people that we have those conversations with, but there's also a lot of kind of netting out we need to do of the ultimate so what? Because that's the thing, emotion AI, so what? Well, let me tell you. So yeah, I think that's something that organizations really need to focus on. And sometimes, and I think we've all encountered it, right? You see stuff out there and you go to a company's website and you think you know what they do, and then you look at their website, it's like, what? Like, I don't get this. And it's not because you're not educated enough and you're not tech savvy enough. That's because they're just not good at communicating why it matters. What is the so what? So.
I think, yeah, I think that's extremely, like it's extreme, like it sounds very easy, but it's really hard to execute because again, you can get very enamored with your technology and you only want to talk about that, right?
Yeah.
But I see that we have so little time left, like please open up for questions. So if you have a question.
Folks, yeah, either just please unmute yourselves and just chime in, or if you want us to ask the question, just put them into the chat box, please.
I have a follow-up question to the question I just asked, which is, and if it's redundant, let me know. Internally, how do you create a culture with the nexus of the geek excitement of, this is really cool, and also, but it's marketable and it will be practical. So almost like the academia and the engineering aspect. What do you do to create that kind of culture internally?
Oh, I love that question. There's a few different things we do, and it takes time, right? And I think it also requires to kind of foster a culture that's very communicative, open. I think also top down, right? As an executive team, we share more with the rest of the company than I've typically seen at any other company I've worked at. So we're very transparent about the business and the opportunities we're working on in as much as we can or should. So we kind of gravitate towards over communicating. But also, and I'll just give you a very recent example. We recently decided to kind of retool or reshape our bi-weekly company meetings. And we're now doing this thing where we basically call on team members to take 10 minutes to present to the rest of the company about their work. And it varies from someone on my team explaining, this is our podcast, this is why we do it, this is the business opportunity it's given us, this is what's happening with the podcast, which is relatable. But it's also one of our more senior machine learning scientists who presented about the new face tracker version, whatever, 13.x21 or whatever it was called, I can't even remember, and how that thing was better compared to the prior version we had. And then he was showing these pretty geeky performance analytics results of why this particular tracker was better. And the point we're making with that is we're spending a lot of time coaching these technical presenters on how they should communicate that to someone in the company that isn't in the R&D organization. So I basically coached him on, you need to explain what is a tracker, because you know what it is, but you can't assume everyone else knows what it is. So what is this thing? Why do we have it? Why do clients need it? How do they use it? And why is the newer version better than the older version? And how did you make that happen? And then you can still throw around your machine learning geek talk, but you need to relate it to those basic questions. And that was literally, we're talking about a 10-minute time slot. And he also showed some videos examples that this person had at the company meeting, but we had basically 2 brief meetings to teach him on how to talk to the rest of the company about that. And I even edited his slides. But when you make that investment, you now have someone in the company talk about something really geeky in a relatable manner. And that hopefully makes him too better at communicating it externally, and enables people in the organization to think about it that way as well. So just this morning, I lined up our QA department to talk about what is QA testing, why does it matter, and how do we do it? And I already was warned by the manager of that team that it would be a lot of prep work to get them there, but I think it's worth the investment. So that's just an example of how we tackle that one.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
I have a question here from Timothy, and it's a long one, so bear with me here for a moment, Gabby. Or can you? Or it's
I can actually look at the chat too.
Okay.
Let me see if I see it. One Google's AI and a confusing list of hits come up referring to machine language, neural networks, deep learning, multivariable calculus, Python, etc. Yes, as I understand AI, the basic enterprise data, the rest is coding. How does a seasoned executive bridge understanding the data needed to achieve a goal? Using the topic you raised earlier, diversity. What is the laundry list of data points need to predict how diversity improves corporate outcomes and product development, effective work environments, leadership? What are the ethics? Okay, lots of stuff in there. I don't even know if we can cover that all in the time we have, but the laundry list, the data points, I think I'm going to try and really bring this down to a more simplistic answer. I think if you're an executive at an organization, you're trying to bridge that and also try and relate it to company outcomes and company goals and maybe even product revenue projections. I think what really matters here is focusing on where are you selling and where are you deploying this technology? Who is it for? What is it supposed to do? And where will it be used? And if you really build out those use cases and understand that need really, really well, that is also going to inform you what type of data you're going to need and what that data should look like and what that data should be annotated for or trained for. It will ultimately, you start there, and then I think ultimately it turns into a conversation with your machine learning experts or your data team, right? It's part of the R&D organization to then figure out, okay, given the user, given the use cases, given where this is deployed, these are the data collection protocols that we need to write. These are the people in the organization that need to review them and provide input. This then is how we're going to warehouse and store the data. This then is what our data annotation team needs to do, because the data annotation team does the human labeling of the data, and human labeled data serves as the ground truth. this is how we're going to do the training or the modeling of the algorithm. And that's an iterative process. And this is what that process looks like. And this is how we make improvements. And then this is how we're going to do performance testing and read out on it. So we actually call it the machine learning pipeline. So there's the whole pipeline and workflow. And every step along the way, you test that against those use cases and deployment cases that you have you're determined up front. So that from when I read your question, that's how I interpret the laundry list, and that's how we would do it. Yeah, reverse engineering the data in order to achieve diverse outcomes. Is that wrong? Depends on exactly how the reverse engineering is done and what the data looks like. And this is where synthetic data is mighty interesting. Synthetic data, basically you could have, you know, a video of me in a car doing something, and then using data synthesis platforms and techniques, you can then create variations of me. You could maybe darken my skin tone, or maybe I'm now not wearing glasses, or maybe I'm now also wearing a hat, and now my head looks this way or this way or this way. And then suddenly you have synthetic data that greatly boosts your data set. So is that ethical? It depends on what you use it for. To augment your data and to use that for training, ethical? I think yes. To test your algorithms with all that, I don't think we're there yet. So anyway, just some thoughts that came to mind on that question. It's an interesting one.
No, there's a lot to unpack there. I agree. Alan has a question here as well, just below it.
Yeah, I'm reading it now. Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. I've thought about that, Alan. So Alan's question is that recently, there was actually in the past, maybe 2 weeks ago or so, there was quite a bit of news about Amazon implementing a camera system in vehicles to supervise driver behavior. And it got a lot of pushback. And especially in the US, where some workers, I don't even know if at Amazon they're unionized already, that's a whole different story, but there's a lot of pushback on that. And yeah, so it's interesting, you call it, you know, surveillance system. I think in the automotive industry, they would call it driver monitoring system. Yeah, so this is a tricky question, right? Because I think ultimately it depends on why are they using this. So in fleet, and fleet being where you have lots of vehicles on the road with lots of drivers, which for example, Amazon has, but it's also trucking companies and long haul truck drivers. There is value in having these systems also for insurance and liability purposes. Often truck drivers are blamed for accidents, even though they're not at fault. So having these type of systems, outward facing cameras, simultaneous with inward facing cameras for insurance and liability purposes can be extremely helpful. There's also regulation in certain countries. Here in the US, it's very different. I hear from, for example, in India, where there's no such regulation, but for long haul truck drivers, certain number of hours you're allowed to drive, certain number of hours you have to sleep. They even have sensors in the car now that can, with weight measurements, understand whether or not a truck driver is sleeping in the cabin, or in the cabin at least, maybe not sleeping. In those situations, a fleet organization might be required to do that in adherence with regulatory requirements. But that's from the perspective of the company. Do these drivers feel that this is a violation of their rights and it's invasive? Yes, but I'm going to say something that sounds really harsh, and I'm still a little bit undecided on this matter myself, but maybe the reality is that it becomes a term of employment, right? That's just the way it is. If this proves to enhance road safety, reduce fatalities on the roads, reduce accidents caused by drowsy or distracted drivers, and then from the corporate perspective, if the insurance and liability risk is reduced and adherence with regulation is, you know, better proven, then maybe this becomes inevitable, right? And yeah, if you don't like it, then sorry, you're not going to be an Amazon driver. Now, is that the politically correct answer? Probably not. And also, I'm honestly myself not quite sure how I feel about that, but there's a lot of debate going on around that. I think at the end of the day, right, and this is the really interesting question, it's if you can show value to the user, they will accept this type of technology. And often, maybe unfortunately, value translates into money. If I'm a driver and I get a better insurance rate because I can prove that I'm a safe driver, and this system that happens to have a camera helps me prove that I'm a safe driver, then maybe I'm okay with it. It's like Facebook, right? Seriously, like maybe a lot of people don't really know what's going on with Facebook and the data they have on you, which is scary, scary, scary. But people perceive to receive value out of using the app, and that's why they're willing to opt in. But I think Alan, I saw your thumbs up, but I think Alan, ultimately for tech companies though, they have to translate it in value to the user. And if too often now it's not being articulated clear enough. So it's an ongoing debate and it's a challenging one.
It is, with a lot of where things fall into an exceedingly large gray area.
Yes, yeah. And but it's I will just add one last thought there, and I know we're out of time. But our one of my coworkers last year went to buy prior to the pandemic went to buy a luxury SUV at a car dealer, and she's tuned to this, so she noticed an optical sensor inside the car. It's just like a really well-known car brand, known for stellar safety and good brand. And she asked the salesperson, "It's a camera. What is it for?" He's like, "Oh, I didn't know there was a camera. Is that a camera?" And she's like, "What does it do? Does it record me? Does it send my data to the cloud? If I put a sticky note over the camera, am I now going to crash my car? What's going to happen?" No clue. So that's going to be the challenge as well, right? For the automotive industry, like how cars, for example, are now advanced AI systems on wheels. How do you explain that to the consumer, right? We're not there yet, or for that matter, to the person who's trying to sell it. It's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. A lot of work.
Very true. We're at 1 p.m. right now. Gabby, do you need to go, or if there's one?
No, I'm good to go a little bit longer if folks wanted to stay on for a bit.
Yeah. Hi, Gabi.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No,
go ahead.
I've already asked questions, so you go.
Okay, thank you. Gabi, thank you. Thanks for being here. Well, yes, I have actually 3 projects in AI myself. I'm coding now in NLP and computer vision. So we combine those algorithms too, and we are creating right now an edtech solution to help people be better equipped for exams and eventually when replacing standardizing tests, we're in that direction.
That's great.
So what I'm willing is whether you have measured engagement when observing your. I mean, our challenge now is to do kind of A/B testing, because we're following like existing findings in science that there are 7 types of learners, and we are trying to identify those. And we are one way of identify these is to observe them, how they interact with avatars we present. Okay, and those avatars are specifically designed the way that students do not, they must be not too realistic, but not too awkward either. Yeah. So it's very challenging. So we're facing the challenge to identify the engagement level of those students with those avatars, which are not professors, but they follow some specific methodology which is well known in the field of pedagogy. So, and my question is whether your company did some work in the measuring engagement level for these situations.
Very interesting question. In the early days, the company explored it a little bit and did some tests in educational settings. But how you define engagement in an educational setting is ultimately very different than, for example, testing engagement when someone is watching an ad. Because in that space, we have some measures that can give insight into engagement, but it's tuned to that use case, right? To that media consumption use case. We know it's very different in education. Again, early days, the company has done a little bit of partnering with educational companies, but we are not pursuing that space right now, just because we don't have bandwidth, and we know we would need to collect a lot more data and train our algorithms to be tuned to that use case. So right now, it's not an area we're pursuing. But it's super interesting, because certainly it has been shown that our type of AI, and potentially also the AI you're building, can really be predictive of learning outcomes, right? And now the problem is, you understand learning success by testing people, and then they pass or they fail, but then you're already too late in the process, right? What if throughout the learning process, you could see if a student, I don't know, they're engaged, they're bored, they're confused, they're not getting it, and you can adapt in real time. That can greatly improve learning outcomes, especially, of course, where it's online learning. But again, it's a use case that's kind of near and dear to our heart, but one that we don't work on right now, just because of the complexity.
No,
Also, using computer vision in
yeah, we do.
K-12,
Yeah.
right, with kids is also a bit of a minefield. Like recording children online and in classrooms, it's a very, very tricky one. And there's many ed tech startup that has failed over gathering data with kids. So
Wasn't
yeah,
this
so it's especially
Max at
focused
Alt
on
School,
kids.
right?
Sorry?
Wasn't this Max at Alt School who was doing
Yeah,
this?
yeah. Alt School. I think actually, now that you mentioned that, I think years ago we did a project with Alt School. There was some talk there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was some research, but there were some others. Either we explored or we actually did a project. It was just around the time I joined the company. It's super interesting, and I really do think that we're heading there in the future. I would just personally, I would maybe not start with kids, but maybe with college
Well,
students.
yeah, we do it with students actually, with undergrads, and then we have actually we've proven that it works with test results. Okay.
Yeah, I believe.
What you're trying to do now is we are trying to optimize, and then that's why we need this engagement level measures, and we have some non-AI tools to make this, okay, in the process, but it's not optimal. So as you probably know, frequently what we think is optimal is not at all when you if you can bring the problem to AI, so as an input, and that's what you're trying to do basically. So
it's really interesting, but it's basically kind of one of those future areas for us that we would love to work on in the future, but we had to pause it right now just because we would need to do so much work that we just cannot take on right now, unfortunately. But super interesting, and I wish you success in that, because I think there's
thank you.
A real need there.
Just to make a note, this way of teaching beats by huge margin the traditional passive learning.
Oh,
that's you already know.
Yeah, I believe it. Super interesting. Very cool. Yeah.
So you mentioned machine learning pipeline. So my work, my passion is MLOps. So I'm curious in terms of MLOps is sort of a combination. You have developers, DevSecOps people, data scientists. It's a multidisciplinary approach to scaling machine learning and AI. And I also have a background in anthropology, so I'm always interested in the cultural aspects of things, internally. So how do you integrate? There's different cultures, the data science culture, the developer culture, and yet these people, if you're going to create something that's a machine learning AI software that you're going to then do in scale, you need to integrate all these different, heterogeneous or into a homogeneous group. What do you do to facilitate that?
Working on it. So it's not easy, as you probably know from experience, especially when an organization grows, right? When you're a small, and I would say we're still a small team, but also just by the sheer amount of data that we have and that we're processing and what we need to do with it, we've really had to give thought to, okay, what is the pipeline? What does the data warehousing look like? What should the data architecture and the data framework look like? And again, to your point, right, those are inputs from lots of different, every single person that's in a technical discipline in the company contributes to that process. We do not kind of have the ML ops czar in our company yet, just because we cannot yet hire at that level. I think eventually, as we grow as a company, we will have one person, I hope, that's ultimately the owner that gets kind of brings together all that input. But right now it's mostly project team based. Certainly in prior years, we've had breakdowns in those areas where we had bottlenecks occur just because the process wasn't as streamlined. And we've certainly made progress in recent years, but we're not there yet. I do expect in the future we will, if we can hire more in that area, I think we will have definitely have someone or even a whole group that's kind of more in the ML ops space. So yeah, so I guess my answer is we're working on it. It's a good question. Yeah, very cool.
Any other takers? We're at near approaching 10 minutes over, so I just want to be cognizant of everyone's time. We should probably actually sign off now, as much as I would love to keep everyone on. Carol, do you have anything else?
No, I just want to thank everybody for their time, and especially Gabby for being with us and sharing your knowledge and everything. So thank you all for being here. And I'm sorry for those who had problems logging in, and we're going to send out the recording after this. So thank you. I have my son who just got home and apparently needs my attention.
The Zoom live continues. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for coming in for the great discussion today. And thank you so much, Gabby.
Thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed it. Great questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh, and for those who are staying on, we're doing our next event is we're going to be interviewing new dean of Wharton, Erica James. She's Wharton's first Black female dean on June 3rd. But the next, is there an event in there, Carol?
There's an event on May 2nd, which is a Sunday, and that's blockchain and impact investment.
That's right. Okay, so 2 events coming up. So look out for both. But for those interested, we're going to be talking about in the event with Dean Erica James. We're going to be talking about how to bring Wharton to the world. So more on that soon. Thank you all. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you for having me. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no, this was fun. Really great questions.
Yeah, those were great questions.
Really awesome questions. And I just love talking about this stuff. And thank you for prepping such mindful questions. I appreciate it, Caroline.
I wish we had more time.
Yeah, there's always, I also get into this stuff. So I kind of have all this stuff I want to bring into it, and it becomes a bit chatty, but yeah, and I apologize for all the interruptions, but
no, this is like how we're all living now. So
yeah, exactly.
This was pretty seamless as far as
the poor guy walks in. Oh, my kid's phone goes off, and I have a sticky note that she's stuck in front of my face here. It says, when you're done, and then an arrow, you're supposed to turn it around and read it. So I'll do it shortly.
There you go. Oh, well, thank you all.
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye.